And here we go.
Another show, Travis.
Show.
You just straightened me.
This is Christmas Eve.
Yeah. Merry Christmas, brother.
Merry Christmas to you. You know what I wish we would do is I wish we would go back to the old 12 days of Christmas from December 25th to January the 6th.
So
we don't understand our calendar. You know, our Jewish friends are like, Hanukkah, look at all those 8 days where we get gifts every day. It's like, well, we used to have a 12 days of Christmas.
Wow.
Where kids would get presents for 12 days, and that's just gone.
Does that 12 days of Christmas include eating every day?
Yeah, I mean, it would be a huge festival. It was the Yuletide, so it was just a great festival.
I'm all in then. Let's go back to that.
Yeah. I'm doing a course on the life of Christ, part 1, and one of the things that I'm doing is not only harmonizing the Gospels, but I'm giving a chronology of Jesus' life. So when was he born? All that stuff. And I am amazed. You can't do this at every point. It's just really difficult to do, but you can make a strong case that Jesus was born on December 25th.
I've heard this.
And so I believe he was born on December 25th. I believe he was conceived on March 25th. That's when the angel Gabriel visited Mary. And you can literally plot it out. You can have John's conception, John's birth in June 20-ish, 21st. Elizabeth goes there. She stays, Luke says, about 3 months. So that gives you a 2.5 to 3.5 month range. And she's right there. And she's back in July, marrying Joseph. And then they're going to Bethlehem. I do not believe, of course, that they were getting there as she was about to give birth and they're knocking on the inn. I don't believe any of that. Right. The inn was the living quarters of humans. And so there was no room in the inn, meaning there was no room in the living quarters of the
right. So they went downstairs.
They went down into the cattle trough and put them in the manger.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I believe the story, obviously. And I guess I say that I watched that Mary movie. Have you seen that on Netflix?
No, I saw there's a Catholic one in the theaters here about the Immaculate Conception that I saw. But
well,
tell me
if you would like to become a heretic, I highly recommend that you watch the Netflix version. It was produced by Joel Osteen, no less.
Oh, wow. I just want to see it then.
Let me tell you, did you know that Joseph fought off some temple guards and killed several of them in defense of the life of the baby Jesus?
Wow.
And did you know that they went to multiple inns and knocked and they were shut out? It's like Bethlehem just had a motel on every single corner, this little town. And it was a bustling place where everyone was like, hey, we're here to see the Messiah.
Wow.
It was so stupid. The only redeeming quality of that really, really stupid movie. And he had to have chosen to be a part of it before he read the script. And that's Anthony Hopkins. He actually did do a decent job playing Herod the Great. And they even developed some of the things that he was going through. They even talk about that in the movie that Josephus talks about, and even his close relationship with Salome, his sister, to whom he gave a small portion, to be sure, but a portion of his territory when he died. So, that's the one redeeming thing, but they don't develop it enough. And Mary goes to Jerusalem as a nun and trains to be a nun, I guess. I don't know. The whole thing, it was just weird, man.
Wow.
So Gabriel does not reveal himself to her in Nazareth. It reveals himself to her in basically in the temple area. Horrible stuff, man. Horrible stuff.
That's why they call it fiction. You can say whatever you want.
Well, you turned me on to a guy by the name of Sean Nemish. I believe I got his name right.
Stephen
Stephen Nemish, I apologize, over at Gospel Simplicity, run by Austin Suggs.
Right.
And Austin is a great interviewer. We kind of aspire to his level of interviewership. He's fantastic. And he's doing kind of like what we want to do. We've not really gotten the traction rolling as much as we want, but we want to interview people of different Christian faiths. And he's finally landed on liberal Protestantism. And so I just watched the interview, and you asked me to. And because of you, Nimish is now on my radar, and I've got some of his books in my Amazon cart, and they will sit there for 10 years. I'll get around to them. But
yeah, I watched this I watched it a couple of weeks ago and sent it to you, and then I watched it again today. And then you watched it. So I thought it was very heartfelt nonsense. I really sympathize with his journey. He's on a sincere path to, trying to figure this out. But it's hard for me to be sympathetic with very many, if any, of his conclusions. And so let's talk about who we are. This is Travis and Ross, and this is Notes On, and it's Christmas Eve, and we try to do Christ on Purpose. And the video that we're referencing is Gospel Simplicity. It's called The Case for Liberal Protestantism with Dr. Stephen Nemes, Nemes.
And we will put it on the link below. Yeah. We sometimes fail to do that, and we apologize, but we'll make a concerted effort to tell our producer to please put it below. But so we watched Nemish was years ago, I guess, in the conservative / moderate bend, but has now come out as a full-fledged liberal Protestant.
Right, and whatever that means.
Things that I found interesting about, and we can talk about what that means, but one of the things that I found interesting about him is the fact that he's informed. He's an informed theologian. He is not somebody who is a kind of touchy-feely guy, and that's all there is to it. His touchy-feeliness comes from a stance of study and contemplation, and he's read the tradition, and he seems to have read both widely and deeply, and that's one of the things I appreciate about him as a person. Yeah.
So he made a point at the beginning that I thought maybe we could start with, Travis. Mm-hmm. He tries to make the point that liberal Christianity is the natural result of, the natural landing place once you break away from Roman Catholicism. Once the Reformation happened, it was a eventual, unavoidable slide into liberal Protestantism. What did you think of that when you heard him say that?
Well, I've heard that a gazillion times. And, I may not have told you, but during my development in college, I actually consciously thought about becoming a liberal. Like, not just a person who votes Democrat, but somebody who actually is a liberal theologian who, agrees with this approach to Scripture and the tradition and so forth.
Uh-huh.
So if we could back up a little bit and talk about what we call liberal Protestantism or liberal Christianity. Liberal Christianity is the thesis that the Reformation didn't go far enough. That just as the Reformation critiqued the decrees and conciliar pronouncements of the medieval church, showing that those decrees are contradictory and therefore cannot be the foundation for our faith, or at least the sole foundation or the infallible foundation. The liberal wants to take that kind of critical lens and put it on the Bible. And the conclusion is that when you take the critical lens and put it on the Bible, you will find that the Bible just is what those conciliar pronouncements are. It is a hodgepodge of disparate and discrete units of tradition, giving the story of how people tried to understand the divine. And it's a fallible, perspectival approach. And I'm not talking about the liberal theologian, I'm talking about the prophets and the apostles and so forth. They were sincerely seeking the divine, and they sought the divine in different and various ways. So if I can map out for you what I call the three theses of liberal Protestantism. First, ad populum. Second, agnosticism. And third, the diversity thesis. And so I can very quickly unpack those. When I say ad populum, it's sometimes we speak of the argumentum ad populum as a fallacy. That's not how I'm using ad populum. I'm using it literally as to the people. And it's really the tu quoque argument. Everybody's doing it. You're doing it. I'm doing it. We're all doing it. And what are we doing? None of us are really yoking our faith to the Bible. All of us are yoking our faith to a tradition about the Bible. And you Catholics are doing it. Protestants are doing it. No one's just reading the Bible. And we're the ones that are truly honest about that. Especially we're honest about that to our Protestant interlocutors. The Catholics already know that they're reading the Bible through tradition, and they're saying the tradition is infallible. The Greek Orthodox are doing something very similar. Right. But we Protestants have always tried to get at the Bible, and we liberal Protestants are basically just telling you what deep down you should know. You're reading the Bible through a grid. And so to get mad at me for trying to get the Bible, to massage the Bible into sort of the world's way of doing things, and to say, well, you can't do that. That is just dishonest, because you're doing the same thing. You're massaging the Bible into, pick a lane, into a Calvinist mold, into a Wesleyan mold, into a kind of easy believist mold. And that's just how you're approaching the Bible. We're all doing it. So let's just be honest. So that's the first thesis. Second, agnosticism. No one knows the truth of these things. No one can know whether there's a God or not. No one can know who and what Jesus is. And when I say agnosticism, I'm usually 99.9% of your Protestants, historically at least, have been Kantian agnostics, meaning that they make a clear distinction between the realm of God, I'm being very simple in my terms, the realm of God and the realm of fact, the realm of logic and reason. And there's this huge gulf between the two, and you cannot use your reason to get to God. That's just clear. And then finally, the diversity thesis. I'm using it not morally. There's a moral thesis called the diversity thesis. Different people have different norms that they follow. The diversity thesis for the liberal theologian is an historical thesis, which basically says that in the beginning, there were many different kinds of Christianities. There was not just one Christianity. There were many. And so, what the New Testament represents is an arbitrary selection of one strand of one legitimate tradition that can be called Christianity, but it certainly was not the only one. There were many Christianities, and the proto-Orthodox who became the Orthodox, they just won the battle, the historical battle of making sure their Christianity prevailed. But in the beginning, there was diversity. That is your threefold thesis. And this is why the liberal theologian can say, Jesus is my way, but he may not be your way. That's Kant's agnosticism kicking in. The realm of faith is up here, and it's not accessible to reason. I must feel it. And so you can have truths of faith that contradict each other, Islam and Christianity, and still be true, even though truths of fact can't contradict each other, because the laws of logic only pertain to this realm, not that noumenal spiritual realm where God is. So Jesus is my way to God. But if he's not your way to God, that's okay.
So how do we respond to that, Travis? How do we as Protestants, how are we able to say, yes, we broke from the Roman Catholic Church and there's a lot of things that are different in our beliefs, but we can make a case for stopping here or somewhere close to here and not continue that slide all the way to what seems to me to be complete agnosticism about everything.
Right. So one of the things that I do try, and it becomes an extremely difficult procedure when I'm talking to someone of his ilk. I try to get them to sign off on a handful of essentials, to wit, if you don't believe them, then you're not a Christian. Now, one of the things that he said is, I don't really care about the word Christian. I mean, it's not even the word that's normally used and all that stuff, but that's kind of irrelevant. That's a red herring. I mean, if you call Christianity whatever you want, I'm a Jesus follower. Okay, so who is Jesus? That has to mean something, right? And liberals are notoriously allergic to getting into those discussions, because the moment you define your terms, that moment you're put into a corner, and now you have to defend yourself, and so you're now engaged in the very same kind of polemics that everybody else is engaged in. So I'm basically turning the ad populum argument back on them. You do it too. Just as it is true that I read the Bible through a tradition. I mean, in my harmony, I'm doing a commentary kind of on the four Gospels by way of harmony. And I'm interacting mainly with people within the Reformed tradition and the evangelical tradition. I get that. I'm not just reading the Bible. But in my exegesis, I am arguing points. I mean, I just finished a section where I'm arguing against Calvin on a certain issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm critical of the founders of my own tradition. Why? Because I think that my highest standard is Scripture, and Calvin would want nothing less than me to disagree with him if I sincerely thought that Scripture taught this.
Sure.
And so I kind of reversed things on them. Oh, so you don't you think that Jesus was a particular person that lived. Now, what did Jesus do? He had to have done something for him to be worthy of your trust or your wanting to follow him, right? So you just had that conversation. Who was Jesus? And according to the Gospels, Jesus is the Son of the living God, and that is the foundation of the church. Jesus says, I will build my church on this.
That's right.
Matthew 16. Now, who you think Jesus is has got to be pretty important if he's going to build his church either on the man who made that profession, as the Catholics would tell us, or as many Protestants would say, the profession itself is what we built the church on. But I don't have to get in that debate to know that who you think Jesus is, and more importantly, or almost as importantly, or as importantly, that Jesus is the Messiah of Israel and the Son of God, that you have to believe that to be a Jesus follower. And I don't see how you can read that text and not conclude that. Now, what's he going to say? Well, that was the Matthean community. The Matthean community said that, but that doesn't mean that all Christian communities say that. Now, this becomes very interesting because I don't have to rest that just on Matthew's gospel. I can go to John, I can go to Mark, I can go to Luke, I can go to Acts, where this message was spread out all over the place. I can go to caves. I can go to Pliny the Younger, who writes a letter to Trajan saying, what do I do with these people who worship Jesus as if he's a god? I can go a lot of places and find Jesus followers, people of the way, whatever you want to call them, saying these things about Jesus. I go to early church fathers like Ignatius, who's calling Jesus God incarnate in his epistles. So I don't have to, it's not like I can't find a Christian tradition that we all agree is first century that's not saying these kinds of things. Like, take James. James does not have a fully developed theology. Most people would say that James is an epistle that's a good example of wisdom literature. He refers to Jesus as the Lord of glory. In James 2, I believe it's verse 1. He calls him the glorious Lord.
Yeah.
But it's a very similar phrase to what Paul says in Corinthians when he calls Jesus the Lord of glory. So I just, it's very difficult to go anywhere in the New Testament, and even the literature that's backed up against it. It takes you to about the middle of the 2nd century. And the only place that they can really go to get a different view as to who Jesus is would be the Gnostics. And so there is a concerted effort among some liberal theologians, biblical scholars, to try to find early strands of tradition in the Gnostic literature. And Robert Price, bless his heart, is actually trying to argue that the Gnostic versions of the New Testament epistles, for example, are the earlier versions, and that the proto-Orthodox added to those. So his text criticism is going to actually place a higher value in Gnostic Gospels. Well, you have to say those kinds of things to make sense out of this nonchalant attitude about Jesus. Well, for you, he's the actual Son of God. For me, he's, whatever, just a really great hippie that uttered, and in the words of William Buckley, uttered homilies that some people found fetching. It's just, so I would press those points.
Yeah. So he makes the point that basically anybody who's trying to come to terms with the person of Jesus in any way that they're doing that has the right to call themselves a Christian.
Right.
How do you respond to that?
I would just simply say, what does the word Christian mean? And if he says it means whatever I want it to mean, and that's essentially what he said, your description of what he was saying, which I think you were accurate in describing him that way. The bottom line is Christianity is just whatever I want it to mean.
Yeah.
And if we're capturing his view correctly, then Christianity doesn't mean anything. So why are you calling yourself a Christian?
Right. What's the point?
It's the same thing going on with, the whole, I think the debate has become passé now in light of the recent election, but what is a woman? Well, you don't want to define that word if you're on the radical left, because any definition you give is going to be exclusive. You're going to exclude people.
That's right.
And any definition you give of Christianity, no matter how ecumenical, how broad-based and so forth, you're going to exclude some people from the definition. By definition. So that's the first couple of points that I would make. I want to give him an olive branch, though. I do share an ecumenism with him. I don't want the idea that if you don't conform to every little thing I say about Christianity, then you're not in the club or something.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with that.
A lot of that goes on in the religious right that I think what he's saying is kind of refreshing. And I would also say that, near the end of the interview, running out of time, sort of, but near the end of the interview, when he was talking about, how he no longer really worries about, what God's plan is for me and what do I have to do with my life and all of that stuff, he was just going on and on about it. My heart went out to him, and I was like, well, first of all, in my tradition, at least, that's not a huge problem for two reasons. We have the wonderful doctrine of justification by faith. And since it is my faith that brings me into union with Christ and his righteousness is imputed to my account, I don't have to fear man's judgment because I'm saved by God, and I don't have to fear God's judgment either. That's the wonderful thing about the good news. And so, contrary to him, where he's looking to modern philosophers to kind of massage his theology into something sensible, I look to at the very least, an old tradition going all the way back to people like the Apostle Paul, where I'm told that my right standing before God can be achieved by faith. That's a wonderful piece of news to give to somebody who's racking his brains about what God would have him do, and he's so nervous. And then second of all, my tradition in particular, the Reformed tradition, makes a distinction between the revealed will of God and the decretal will. And so what I need to do, if somebody sits down and says, what do I need to do with my life? What am I doing? My son is still asking those questions, and we have long conversations about it. And the bottom line is, as long as your life is in conformity with Scripture, what Scripture is teaching, morality, are you a man of character? Are you living by your biblical principles? Are you going to church and so forth? As long as you're living within the revealed will of God, you need not, nor should you, try to delve into the decretal will, like God, what God is predestinating. That's a fool's errand. You're to live out your life to the glory of God, and you are to pursue your desires. Those desires that are tempered by the revelation in Scripture. If you do that, you will find the path that God is leading you on. You will find fulfillment in it. So you don't have to rack your brain like that. That there's just no reason why you have to have that existential crisis every time you wake up. So my heart went out to him when he was talking about that. I was like, I don't get that feeling at all. I have all kinds of drawbacks and so forth about Christianity. I mean, sometimes I wish it was false, because I don't want to tell people that they're going to hell. I don't like that. I mean, who does? Does anybody really like that? But I care enough about them to center my life around this as much as I can, and defend this, because I don't think there's anything else really worth believing. And if the man did rise from the dead, if he was born of a virgin, as we're going to celebrate tomorrow, what a wonderful story. And why would I ever want anybody to replace it with something else?
That's right. Travis, we only got 3 minutes left, but I've got a list here that maybe we can run into next week that I made while I was listening to him. And these are things that his way of thinking about religion, God, faith, these are things that he has no way of dealing with. Okay? Now, first one is any moral responsibility. The way he described it, he felt relief when he didn't have to feel like he was tied down to doctrines that were unclear. It seemed to me when I heard him say that, you could be an axe murderer or a rapist or just the most selfish person in the world and still believe in God.
Right. Now, I want to hope that he was only restricting himself to doctrine and not morals.
Well, okay, but doesn't morality come from doctrine? Where does morality come from?
I think that you're absolutely right. But the old liberals back in the 19th century said we boil everything down. He quoted Harnack, but you can reduce Harnack's 4 points to 2: the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, and everything else is really just sort of swept aside as not all that important. Well, what the past 100 years has taught us is that you can't do that. You can't get rid of the metaphysics and think that, and by metaphysics, I'm speaking very broadly of just your idea of reality. You can't get rid of your idea of reality totally and think, well, people are just going to step in line with good old-fashioned love thy neighbor. They're not going to do that.
It's not going to happen. That's so naive.
And I think that the liberal theologians of the early 20th century would be shocked. They would be mortified as they saw their intellectual heirs, their spiritual heirs, doing what they're doing. I think that they would be shocked. Maybe not Paul Tillich, because I mean the guy had sex with every woman he saw, or he at least tried to. One of the most notorious liberal theologians. And by the way, he said, we don't have our Summa. And, I'm not in that tradition, so I'm not going to speak for it. But I've always thought that Paul Tillich was sort of the Summa. His systematic theology was the Summa Theologica of the liberal Protestants. So I was kind of surprised to hear him say that. I just didn't. I didn't think that they didn't have the equivalent of a Thomas Aquinas. So that was kind of news to me. But yeah, Paul Tillich, he didn't care about sexual mores, at least. I don't know what he thought about other things. His wife, by the way, Paul Tillich's wife wrote an autobiography, and she was bisexual and basically talked about her sexual exploits, in the book.
Wow.
And they were swingers, man. The Tillichs.
Huh.
Were in an open marriage, and
well, looks like this is going to run in. This is going to run into next week, because let me finish the list. We're out of time, but it'll be the setup for next week. So, no, it's okay. The next one is sin. What about when we screw up and we realize we can't fix it? His theology, if you want to call it that, can't deal with that. What about the cross of the need for God, the need for me to need? I can't do this on my own. The idea of the afterlife. What happens to us when we die?
Yeah.
Is God involved? It sounds like his idea of God is just a deistic God that wound it all up and went to Fort Lauderdale for the rest of the universe and isn't involved.
Yeah.
I never heard him say anything about prayer, like, maybe God can lead me in these things if I actually prayed about it. And he doesn't have to try to figure it all out on his own, and which is revelation. What about God revealing himself to you if you ask for it? It seems to me his Christianity is as empty as any atheistic morality I've ever heard.
Yeah. Well, we'll pick that up next week. And we'll talk. Okay. God bless you, man. Take care.
Merry Christmas, Travis.
Merry Christmas to you.
All right, brother.